Today we'll talk about transition metals. This is Unit 12-2B. We'll talk about characteristics, oxidation numbers, uses catalysts, color, and uses cancer treatments. We'll talk later about transition metals in other podcasts in Term 3. The assessment criteria that we'll be using here is the following. We'll understand the general mechanism for heterogeneous catalysts, and that is using transition metals. We're going to recognize some of the characteristics of these transition metals. We're going to look at their oxidation number. We're going to understand the general structure of a complex ion. A complex ion normally uses a transition metal as its central ion. And we're going to talk about the nature of the ligands, the things that go around the complex ion. We're going to predict the shape and draw complex ions. We're going to talk about the color of complex ions and the color changes when we change ligands. And we'll also talk about the fact that transition metal complexes have been used in human biology to treat cancer. Understand the general mechanism for heterogeneous catalysts. You can remember that a catalyst works by changing the activation energy for a reaction. This is done by creating a new mechanism or reaction path. A transition metal offers a new reaction path. The elements or molecules that are reacting are absorbed by the surface of a metal. Once they're absorbed, their bonds can be broken and the reaction can take place. You can see in that picture the process of adsorption, the attaching to the transition metal as a solid state, and then the desorption, the release of that reaction elements from the metal. Catalysts make the chemical reaction follow at a lower energy cost, and catalysts, generally speaking, are not used in the reaction. This table, I think, gives you an excellent idea of heterogeneous catalysis and metals that can be used in heterogeneous catalysis. Notice as you go from the bottom right to the top left, adsorption increases. Perhaps before we talk about complex ions, it would be good for us to recognize some of the characteristics of transition metals. All the D block elements except zinc, cadmium, and mercury have partially filled d orbitals. So d orbitals are going to take up a very important part of our discussion of transition metals. We use zinc, cadmium, and mercury and talk about them as transition metals because many of the other characters other than electronic configuration follow along with transition metals, such as metallic character. Almost all the transition elements exhibit metallic character. The strength of the metallic bond depends upon the number of unpaired d electrons. Ionization energy, from left to right, generally speaking, ionization energy increases, as you would see as we have talked about the periodic table for other elements going from left to right. The following video talks about more properties of transition metals.
The large block in the middle of the periodic table is home to the transition metals. including well-known metals such as iron, copper, gold, and mercury. Other more unusual transition metals include scandium, niobium, and ruthenium. They all have similar physical and chemical properties. Transition metals are much less reactive than the metals in groups 1 and 2, so in general the transition metals are more useful. But all metals have the following physical properties in common. Metals are hard. Many tools are made from metals because of their hardness. Metals are shiny, so they're widely used to make decorative items. Metals are malleable. They can be hammered and bent into different shapes, resulting in these fine items of jewellery. Or this huge modern sculpture. Metals are ductile. They can be drawn into wires, again making them useful in jewellery and construction. Metals are strong. The metals in these bridges have good tensile strength for supporting heavy loads. Metals conduct heat. Thermal images of a saucepan on a hot plate show that heat energy is easily conducted through the metal pan. Metals also conduct electricity. Place any metal in a circuit and it'll allow electricity to flow. Most metals have high melting and boiling points. A tungsten filament has a melting point of over 3,000 degrees Celsius. Metals are also sonorous. This means they produce a sound when struck. Alloys containing the transition metals copper, nickel and zinc are used in coin production. A mixture of metals is used because it's stronger and harder than pure metal. What other properties make metals suitable for minting coins? Some transition metals can be used as catalysts to speed up chemical reactions. The transition metals platinum and rhodium are the catalysts in catalytic converters. These speed up the chemical reaction between carbon monoxide and nitrogen monoxide produced in engines. These polluting gases combine to make carbon dioxide and nitrogen. This is how a catalytic converter reduces the emission of pollutants. The solutions of transition metal compounds are often very colourful. Because of their bright colours, transition metal compounds are used to produce the vivid colours in pottery glazes. They add colour to the surface of the clay.
Transition metals show variable oxidation number. Again, the nature of the unfilled d orbitals allows for a variety of oxidation states. You see, as you move from left to right across the periodic table, or top to bottom in the diagram on the right, we have an increase in oxidation state and then a decrease as we move from left to right across the periodic table. You'll see some pictures here of a complex ion. A complex ion has a metal ion at its center, a transition metal, surrounded by other elements that form coordinate covalent or dative bonds. These molecules or ions that surround the central metal ion are called ligands. These ligands create dative bonds with the metal ions, and ligands may have 1, 2, or even 6 sets of unshared pairs to form dative bonds. In the picture in the top right, you'll see some complex ions that have 6 dative bonds. The ligands here are called monodentate or unidentate. Each one of the ligands offers one set of unshared pairs of electrons to the complex ion center, which is the transition metal. In the bottom left, you see a different kind of ligand. This is a multidentate ligand where there are a total of 6 sets of unshared pairs of electrons that match up with the vacant d electron energy level shell. It is a challenge to be able to predict the shape and draw complex ions. We use the number of points of attachment to the transition metal and by a name called coordination number. You can have 1 per each location. You can have 6. You can have up to 16. The coordination number is affected by the size of the central metal ion and the ligands, and also by the electronic nature of that central ion and the ligands that surround it. Normally, the bigger the charge on the central ion, the more attraction there is. The larger the ligand, the fewer ligands there are around the transition metal core. In the bottom right, you see a shape that has a coordination number of 4 because of the large size of the chlor ion. There's only so much room around the copper ion for those chlor ions. But you can have, and their coordination number would be 4. But as you can see in the picture on top right, you can have many other shapes of complex ions, not just 4. Most of the transition elements form colored compounds, both in the solid state and in the aqueous state. The electrons in the d orbitals get promoted from a lower energy level to a higher energy level. We'll see that in the next slide. We have colors for different complex ions due to the absorption of visible light by these ions. In copper, for example, which looks blue to our eyes, that is due to the absorption of the red light wavelength. So all we see are the remaining wavelengths, which are blue, or the ones to the left in the visible light spectrum. The following video will show you the exchange of water ligands with chlor ligands.
You might like to pause at the beginning and study these equations. Here we take a look at reversible ligand substitution involving copper-2 complexes. I place in the test tube hydrated copper-2 chloride and add deionized water. In this solution we have the copper-2+ ion surrounded by 6 water ligands. You can see it on the right there, it's an octahedral complex. Overall charge of the complex ion is 2+. Next then I add concentrated hydrochloric acid, and the blue solution will turn green and then green-yellow in color. The 6-coordinate octahedral complex on the right becomes, as you see there, 4-coordinate. We've got no charge there. The 2 minus charges cancel with the Cu2+. Its green color will deepen in color. There's a 3rd chloride ligand has been introduced, and then a 4th. And we end up there with CuCl4 with an overall 2 minus charge. Now I can reverse this by adding water, as you see, deionized water, and it goes back to blue again, back to that 6-coordinate octahedral complex, the hexa-aqua cuprion. And we can go back the other way once more. Let's add some concentrated hydrochloric acid. And again, we go back from 6-coordinate to 4-coordinate, back to the green color. Quick look again at the equilibrium here. As we move from left to right, we move from 5 moles of particles on the left to 7 moles of particles on the right. So there's an obvious increase in entropy. And that favors the forward reaction. But as well as the thermodynamic consideration, there's the equilibrium consideration. By Le Chatelier's principle, if we increase the concentration of chloride ions, we'll push the equilibrium to the right in favor of that green or yellow-green CuCl4 complex ion. And if we add water, then it'll push the equilibrium to the left in favor of the octahedral hexa-aqua cuprion ion, which is blue in color. So in conclusion, when the copper salt is added to water, the copper ions become surrounded by 6 water molecules in what is an octahedral complex, and it appears blue in color. As we add concentrated hydrochloric acid, chloride ligands replace the water ligands. The complex changes from being 6-coordinate to 4-coordinate, and the color becomes.
Now, when ligand substitution happens, we have color changes as well. You can see in the picture in the top left a meta-aqua ion, 6 water molecules around cobalt, being replaced by 4 molecules of water and 2 of hydroxide, and then being replaced by 6 molecules of ammonia. You can see the color changes that happen in this process. Electronically, we have changes in the d orbitals when one ligand leaves and another arrives, and we have an excitation of those electrons in different energy levels. You see the delta E in blue, and that is shown to our eyes by a color change. We'll talk more about this in class. Transition metal complexes can be used to treat cancer. Perhaps one of the most popular is a chemical called cisplatin. You'll see it has the central ion of platinum. It's surrounded by 2 ammonia ligands and 2 chlor ligands. Now, the platinum in cisplatinum blocks cell division in both healthy and cancerous cells. Cisplatin is approved to be used alone or with other drugs in cancers that can't be treated surgically or with radiation therapy. The following video describes the actual process of cisplatin with the DNA of a cell.
Cisplatin is in a class of drugs known as platinum-containing compounds used to treat various types of cancers, including metastatic testicular and ovarian tumors. There are 3 key components involved in cisplatin's mechanism: cisplatin, DNA, and an HMG protein. Here is an example of a cell being affected by cisplatin. Shown is the cell's membrane, where cisplatin makes first contact. Most cisplatin enters the body through active transport, but some molecules are passively diffused through the cell membrane. Once in the nucleus, cisplatin can form an adduct with 2 consecutive guanine bases within a strand of DNA. The molecule loses its chlorine atoms in exchange for the nitrogen atoms of the target guanines. Cisplatin can bond more tightly with nitrogen because nitrogen balances the platinum charge more effectively than chlorine. It is this adduct-induced DNA bend that allows the binding of proteins which contain the high mobility group HMG domain. Once the protein is bound to the DNA, it inserts a wedge-like phenyl group of phenylalanine 37 into the widened minor groove created by the bend. The tightly bound HMG protein causes destacking of the nucleotide bases, resulting in the DNA helix becoming kinked. In this way, cisplatin can be thought of as a monkey wrench in the DNA repair system. With the HMG protein bound to the DNA, the modified strand is not repaired properly, and so the cell dies. The success of cisplatin depends on its ratio of efficacy between cancerous and healthy cells.